Welcome to No Clip, the podcast that's like a book club for people who don't think that books reward them enough for being good at them. I'm Chad Rutherman.
And I'm Andy Kinnick.
And today, we're going to be talking about Slay the Princess, a game that was developed and published by Black Tabby Games and was released in 2023 on Windows, Linux, Mac OS, PS4, PS5, Switch, Xbox One, and the Xbox Series X and S.
But first, if you give us a like or a rating, it would be greatly appreciated.
I long for the day when the Xbox Series X and S is not a platform that games are developed for, just so I don't have to say it anymore.
That's what we all hope for.
Yeah, the world will once again prosper. Slay the Princess is a Stanley-like game. It is a text-based, like, visual novel style game where you make decisions based on instruction and meta textual analysis that you make and is given to you by the game. That is my official definition of what a Stan-like is.
It's a find the endings game.
It is also kind of... So, that's a great place to start and a thing that I was thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
Collect the endings games. We've talked about a couple of them on the podcast. Fatum Bachelor and Halloween Haunted Manor. What is it called?
Oh, Midnight Manor.
Midnight Manor.
And Who's Lila, more recently.
Yeah, and Who's Lila. And we've mused a lot in all of those episodes on, like, the different sort of, like, philosophies behind making choose your ending games. And one of the things that I really liked about the structure of this game, which I'm just going to go ahead and say spoilers right off the bat, because this is a narrative game. There's a lot of sort of, like, subtext. It's a really cool game. I do recommend checking it out. I think it's really cheap. So if you know already, I guarantee it, you know already if you will like this game from a cursory Google search. There are probably some people who will need some pushing, but if you're in this game's demographic, you probably already know about it. But so we'll just say that now. One of the things that I like about the structure of this game is that collecting the endings is like a part of the game's overall structure, so that there are other endings that you get depending on what endings you get.
Right.
If you break down each, like, individual day into its own ending, which I guess you could choose not to.
Right.
But yeah, you have to essentially collect 5 key items to finish the game. But each of those is an ending in the sense that many other games would consider it.
Yeah. Like, I looked at the achievements, and there's something like 212 of them or something. And yeah, I think that goes to show, like, just how many endings there probably are in the game. Like, it seems like what is that called? Like a factorial? Like, how many different combinations there are is probably, like, ludicrous.
Yeah, it's crazy how much this is another genre you could consider this in is the wow, they did a lot of writing genre. Another genre that we've talked about a lot. Yeah, where you're like, I can't believe how many different options there are and how many of those options have, like, a unique branching path. Like, there are a couple of these that I would consider, like, my favorites that I saw while playing the game.
Mm-hmm.
And there is, like, a non-negligible chance that you didn't encounter them at all.
Right.
So, yeah, which also makes reviewing this game, which I'll remind myself, we do not consider ourselves reviewers.
Right.
Very difficult to do because it is a game that contains multitudes. You are not guaranteed to see everything that the game has to offer. And the tone of each of the different endings is so drastically different from others that you could get, like, a different core experience in a way. from one person to the next. Which I would be interested to see like where people generally fall. From what I saw from the percentages of the achievements gotten, it seems like people are very thorough. Players of this game will get a lot more endings than you need to just get the end of the game. It seems. So maybe I'm wrong about that, but we'll see.
Yeah. So I kind of find myself like in that camp where I kind of wanted to go for more endings, but decided not to because I'm busy. But like, yeah, like one thing that kind of deterred me is like, I don't know, doesn't feel like there are a ton of like points to make different decisions. I didn't like thoroughly poke at and test that as much as I could have, but like, yeah, I must be wrong because, like, yeah, there's so many different endings. But
yeah, I think it's intentionally designed to be a little bit difficult to test. I think because it removes choices that you've already made as you play through the game, but it's like kind of hard to tell because sometimes there are just a lot of options, but then other times ones will be grayed out, or you'll get a direct like no answer from a higher power, which is not like a God from the machine kind of situation. It is explicitly written into the script. But yeah, so I do not blame you at all. I think it is actually very hard to sort of test to see what different options you can take.
Yeah, because like my first like kind of go through, I was very much like wishy-washy and was like trying to test like the narrator and the princess to see like who was like fucking with me, and like, you know, like I was very apprehensive to like make a decision like one way or the other whether I was going to try to slay or save the princess. And my first ending ended up being my favorite one that I got. But yeah, and every other one after that I kind of like stuck more to like a singular path, like where I like tried to just like fucking rush the princess and kill her right away and see what happens then, or like try to be like Mr. Friendly the whole way, like the extremes. And like, so like, yeah, I found like, yeah, like my first run through was like the most involved, and I was just curious if you had like a similar different experience.
Yeah, I had, well, there are a couple of different things. I think the thing that I most wanted to talk about based on that is just that I think that the game, so the way that the game works, if you haven't played it, is the game takes place over the course of 2 to, I guess, 4 days, or like 4 chapters, depending on what your choices are, and then ends with a reset that then takes you back to the first day, and you do that 5 times and then you end the game. And so individually, every time that it goes to a new chapter, you will pick up a new voice in your head that is representative of how you behaved, like what choice you made in the previous one. So what I found a lot was that voice would influence my decisions in the chapter that they were introduced in a lot. So when I got the paranoid, I would be more distrustful of everything and try and make the most apprehensive decision. Like I was kind of theming my choices around like who my passenger was. And I sort of liked that. I felt like there were a lot of ones where, because the game is so lacking in context, which I want to talk about a little bit more when we talk about the narrative, but just accept it doesn't have a lot of context for what you're doing. You're put into a situation where they just tell you to go kill the princess, and that's it. You just make choices from there. It was nice to have sort of an emotional grounding point to like make to choose. And so there were some endings I liked and some that I didn't based on that. I will say my first playthrough was influenced by my knowledge of the Stanley Parable.
Right.
I wanted to see if it was in fact a Stan-like, and so the very first thing I did was just turn around and leave, because my thought process was, this is a game where I have to get a bunch of endings, so this one seems like one where it will just end the game and start me over really quickly. And that actually, if you do that as your first ending, it actually gives you a bonus scene at the end that I didn't know about and also didn't get, and had to reload the game to do it because I read about it later. But yeah, totally coincidentally, if the first one that you do is the Contrarian, then you get a different set of dialogue if you go to kill the princess after she becomes a god. Spoilers again. So that was like weird. It was extremely weird, but also set the game up, I think, on a really like good foot for me. But then just like the way it reacted, I found very like impressive. I like the way that it sort of wrapped itself into the narrative, and it's a great way of introducing the voices in your head, because you don't, because you know when what you're choosing to do is being the Contrarian. Like, had I stopped before he was introduced, I might have described that as such before being introduced to a character named the Contrarian. But yeah, some of the more involved ones are, I think the ones that are more involved are just better. Right. Most of the time, like based on the writing. There are very few ones that are both simple and satisfying, which is strange considering like how many times you go through the loop. You would think that there would be a version of the one where you just like go kill her, and then and it's great, and it's like got a cool little thing that happens. But for the most part, it's always like the ones where you make a decision and that gets really drawn out.
Yeah. I is the achievement you get like the Contrarian one, that does it say like now the game really begins or something like that? Like as like the flavor
I did
text?
get that.
Because like that was
because
like on my first chapter 2, like after the first time I died, I did the same thing where I just left. Okay. I don't remember if that's the same achievement or not, but or if there are even branching pathways there. Because
I found out apparently there's I don't know if it's an achievement or an ending that you get if you just try and leave on day 2 all 5 days. So that could be a thing. I don't know. I did not do that.
Oh, it's called The Real Slay the Princess Starts Here, and then the flavor text is you'll know it when you see it. And it's got a picture of a mirror. That's the one I got from doing that.
I'm guessing that, well, I don't know. I also have that achievement, but I don't know when it popped. But I think that to get the ending that I eventually got was you had to do it on the first day, like before the first time. Yeah,
which I did not do. But the first ending I got was called A Cautious Heart. And
not one I got.
And it involved like starting off, I think, hostile to her, but then convincing her to trust you. And then I think it's one of those ones that goes to 4 days, and then like the cabin is like a big bramble, like a big bunch of thorns. And I think you end up both like dying together from the thorns, and then like the version of like the vessel for the god is like a cool thorny thing. So that one was my favorite ending that I got, because like it felt the most satisfying to approach it that way, where like you start off kind of like it's like the classic fucking romantic comedy structure. It's like enemies to lovers.
The Slay the Princess meet cute. Yeah. That's really funny. Did you to totally jump way out of proportion with where we are in the episode.
Please do.
When you got to the very end of the game, did you follow the Ghostbusters rule of if you are asked if you want to become a god, you say yes? Or did you do the like boss fight at the end?
I became as a god.
Right.
Yeah.
That is also what I did first, and went back and did the second thing with a save load.
Literally had the thought I should make a save game here, like as I hit A, to like do the ending, and like it's like, oh shit, it's too late.
Yeah, my last save was on the previous day, and I'm glad it was, and I'll talk about that in a second. But it was really funny because like the end of my first playthrough was erotic. I don't know if that's the word. Because I did the last two that I got originally were the damsel, where you
I got
just
that one too.
Yeah, where you just follow. It's the smitten is the voice in your head.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, I got the broken, which is where you engage with her in combat and
with
then
the big
give
devil
up.
version.
No, when it's just her punching you.
Oh, okay.
With martial arts. Maybe this is the big devil. I don't know what your.
It's like the second. Yeah, I think I got that voice, and then like the broken after the first day, and then I think you go back in, and she's like a giant devil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, she wasn't like a devil. She was just like a tall her.
Okay. Yeah, mine. She had like devil horns and a devil tail.
Oh yeah, no, mine did not have that.
Interesting.
Did you have to climb down giant stairs?
Yes, I think so.
Was it that Snowboard Kids 2 level where you get shrunk down in the room?
You are small.
I figured you would remember it.
That
if
definitely,
it was like that. Okay.
Yeah, that definitely happened.
Yeah, so mine definitely went from like trad wife to giantess kink, like very quickly, and then the game ended. So when you do the fight, the quote unquote fight, when you tell her that you're going to kill her, she tries to convince you of something, depending on what your choices were, by each of the 5 vessels coming back in reverse order from when you got them to sort of like describe what happened and like what that meant for them. And it was really funny to go from the broken ending to the damsel ending. And then it was like, and then I was a body that was fully only made out of knives. And I was like, you're getting less convincing as time is going on. Because I started with like 3 eldritch horrors in a row and just assumed that was every one.
Right.
And it isn't. It turns out that's not true. But it was very weird to see it happen in reverse with the fight. But the actual 5th one that I got for that one is my favorite ending in the game, in my opinion, which was the princess and the dragon. And you have to get the cold. I don't know if this is 100% true because there are a lot of branches. But what I did was that I killed her immediately without a second thought. Had the cold as my companion, and then she becomes a ghost. You let her possess you, and then you kill yourself. And then you become one person. And so you are the voice in her head, and you see the entire like loop play out from her perspective.
Oh, that's really cool.
With a version of you that doesn't have the decision maker, like the actual, like you, the player, inside of it. And so the voices are arguing about what to do without you being able to influence it. So it's like a really cool ending, and I think it's one of the most like eye-opening ones. And I wouldn't have gotten it if I didn't like reload a save and go back.
That is pretty cool. I wish I would have gotten that one. But yeah, that kind of plays into like my thought process as like I was playing through it. Because like I did the kind of the similar thing to you, where like I started like listening to the voice that I picked up. And either like doing what it said or doing the opposite of what it said, depending on what I was trying to go for. And but then like as it goes on, and I think the game makes it as like kind of explicit, but like you eventually realize that like the princess, it just does the exact same thing that you do. Like if you go down there hostile, she's gonna be hostile to you. If you go down there completely like neutral, she is completely neutral. Like it's interesting how long it took me to realize that's what was happening. Is like however I treated her, she treated me the same way right back. And I think that's really interesting. And then so like I think an ending like that is really cool, and sad that I missed it. I think it plays into the theme.
That's I don't know if you checked the memories thing that you unlock when you beat the game. It has like a list of all of the vessels that you can get. And so because I went back and did one over, I had 6, and I think that there's like 15 or something. Like there's a good number of them that you can get. So there is always going to be that variation. And it's interesting how like my experience and your experience were so different in that way, because I got 3 Eldritch Horrors in a row. When I went to the 4th one and got the damsel, I was always expecting her to just turn into a monster at some point,
right?
Because she had in all previous things, but that is not always the case, and I wouldn't have known that if I didn't go for that very sort of like straightforward version,
right?
So yeah, it was interesting to see, and because you had a different experience, you were like, I was able to negotiate with her and get to a different answer. You then had a more sort of contemplative, like I didn't wake up to what the game's rules were until after I finished it and went back.
Yeah,
because I was under the impression that it was more streamlined than that.
Yeah. My second ending was the one where she is just a pile of blades. Like she rips out of her skin. It's just like a sword monster. That was very jarring. When that was the second one I got. I was like, oh, no negotiating this time.
Yeah. And I also have to say, like, it was one of those things, and I'm not, this is not like my take. I'm putting air quotes around that. People can't see that. This is not my take on the narrative in any way. This is just like a stray thought that I had, which was as I was going through, and especially as I got to those 4th and 5th days, I was like, I really hope like a good ending here that makes it sort of like make sense would be very refreshing, because even though I've enjoyed the writing up to this point, I feel like it's going to be difficult to tie this into something coherent at the end. And I was pleasantly surprised that it did. Like, I think the game would have been almost as good if it was just vignettes and it was just like a fun find new ways to experience new elements of the narrative with like a very abstract story. But I think they do a really good job of sort of explaining what the actual plot was and tying it together in a logical way that I just frankly didn't expect from this genre at all. Like I really did expect it to be more kind of like it happened because of X as an explanation, as opposed to something that actually had reasoning behind it in that way.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I feel like that's what makes it work really well as a find the endings game, is like, even though the themes and like the aesthetics and everything are very weird, and they deal with like cosmic gods and things like that, and a world ending loop and stuff. Like it really is like a simple structure though at the core of it. And yeah, I like the setup is really good too. Like setting up like the narrator, like when you come back on the second loop and you can like talk to the voices in your head about like what's going on and how he doesn't know, and like it's immediately like intriguing and like clues you into the fact that there is like a backstory and like a greater narrative like pretty early. So I think that works really well to like keep you playing. If like you're the type of player that isn't going to just be down to just mess with the mechanics and just try to get all the endings, there's something else pulling you through.
Yeah, it spoilers a bit for like my final take on the game, but like I think that is kind of the thing that separates like an actually really great choose your endings like visual novel game from like the genre fare. Like things that are people who are going to play a visual novel will play regardless of like the grander setup. But the fact that this was able to both do what visual novels do well, which is, you know, telling a narrative with player choice and having that choice actually make a difference, and having lots of ways for the story to end, but also make it really accessible to people. There's somebody, I don't know if you noticed this, and I'm not going to say their name on air. There is somebody that is on both of our friends lists who played this game before, that I was very surprised to see, because it is not up his alley at all from from what I would have understood of him. So like, it has to be doing something right if it's pulling quote unquote normies into the game. And like, you could say a similar thing to like Doki Doki Literature Club, which is a game that both of us have played, but we didn't do an episode on. The long and short of it is essentially like, that game is shocking, which I think pulled people in, but I think that this game is designed in a way that someone could pick up with no prior knowledge and actually not just like enjoy it, but like get into the genre tropes of it in a way that other games, because I mean, I guess Doki Doki is made in like a visual novel studio engine, so it can't escape from its bindings in the way that you, as an artificial god, are able to escape from your bindings in this game. But yeah, it's a very accessible and cool game that I think people would just like generally without being into the genre.
Yeah, and I think it's also got that like really smart, like, I don't know, like marketing, or like it's got like a catchy concept. Like, I almost would like compare it to like Untitled Goose Game. Like, I almost just feel like it's the kind of thing that like people hear about and see and like want to check out. Like, it's just called Slay the Princess, you know? And like, I think that's immediately intriguing. You're like, oh, like, what's the catch? Yeah,
right.
Yeah, like I think it's got a good hook. That's the word I want. So I think it makes people want to check it out.
And also, I just like, I guess, yeah, we'll do a minor detour here, sort of on that note, because I think one of the things, there's a broad appeal to this kind of like very shaky, sketchy art style that I guess I didn't expect. I think that a lot of people do just like this style because it reminds them at this point of like old animation. And it's almost like nostalgic in that way. And I felt very cozy with it for the whole game. And I was really impressed by some of the more abstract interpretations that were all done in this like hand-drawn style. And I imagine that also draws people in to some extent, because the Steam page of this game, very unassuming looking.
Yeah, I think it's got a little bit of that like appeal that like something like Cuphead does, because it's like an art style you don't normally see in video games. Like, yeah, and it's got like heavy use of like hatching for shading. And I think it does feel, I think, a little nostalgic to people. Like everyone's probably different, like what that like kind of makes them think of or what they connect that to. Like, I could see people like connecting that almost to kind of like a Tim Burton kind of style, or like a whole bunch of different things. So yeah, I think it is. And I think the person who did the art for this is like some kind of like award-winning illustrator. So yeah, like Yeah, it just has a great aesthetic appeal. For sure.
I believe that the game portion of the game is made just by two people. And I believe that they're related. I don't know, question mark, if they're a married couple or if they're related by blood. I don't actually know. I didn't look into it. And like one person did a lot of the writing and the programming, and then the art and writing were done by the other. But then, and this is this is another one. I had a moment immediately upon starting this game where my first thought was, do I just think all British people with this accent sound the same? And I was a little worried about it, so I looked it up. But the guy who does all of the voice acting for the male characters, so the hero or the male or ungendered characters like gods, are all voiced by Jonathan Sims, who, and this is such a pull for, I think, I would assume most normal people. I don't know how popular it is generally. He's from a podcast that I used to listen to a lot called the Magnus Archives, which was like a narrative Monster of the Week style podcast that I always thought was like mostly okay to good. It was like a horror podcast that had good episodes, very like Doctor Who-ish. And I heard, but his voice is like the best part of it. Like the dude is a great voice actor. And when I heard him as the narrator, I was just like, hold on, is that this guy? Because I've had false recognition before on this very podcast.
Right.
So,
yeah, I would say that's definitely a pull.
It is kind of a pull, yeah. But yeah, but I do wish that they had other voice actors. Not that he isn't great. It's just like it was hard to tell people apart without like reading the subtitle that it says who's talking. Because it is just the same guy.
Yeah, I don't know. That really worked for me.
Narratively, it makes sense.
Yeah. The whoever the voice actress is that is doing the princess, I think does a better job of doing like slightly different voices. But like, I don't know. There's something about like the fact that all the voices are the same as like, well, obviously it's like a thematically appropriate because they're all parts of you.
Right.
But I don't know. They're just, there's something about it that I don't know. I just like.
I do, like I said, I do like it. And yes, thematically, I think it's its strongest suit. I just think that there were definitely parts where, and I think that to me, like the biggest problem is that it's the narrator and the hero sound too similar. And they're the ones that are in every one of them. So yeah, I don't know. I wish that there was just like some guy who sounded very similar, but just different enough. Because I can even understand why they would intentionally do it. I just think that it may have caused a little bit of confusion for me. Especially in the times before you can appreciate it, before you know that everyone is one.
Right. Before we get too far away from it, you bring up the fact that this game was mostly made by two people. That kind of surprises me because this game I feel like has Game Jam vibes. Like it feels like a concept that like you come up with when like you have a group of people, and like you can't come up with a concept that everyone's going to agree on. Like you can't iron it out all perfect. Like you have to like kind of pick a thing and go with it.
Right.
It has like, if that makes any sense, I feel like this game has that kind of energy. Because I feel like there's things I can point to about it that like, oh, that could have been a little better. This could have been a little more fleshed out. But it's got such a cool, creative, like kind of spark to it that I feel like arises when you have like limitations like that. So yeah, a little surprised that it doesn't have like a small team of like 10 to 15 people that worked on it.
Yeah, I mean, it really does kind of feel that way. And I know that they have a new game that's coming out. I think it's in early access right now that apparently is similar to this. So I guess it has that feeling, but you know that because there were only two people, that they just did agree on the concept.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. The one thing about this game, I mean, there's a lot of things obviously in the final version, which we, I guess, technically played the pristine cut, which is a funny name because of the pristine dagger that you get every time.
Right.
But because of so there's additional content there, but the only thing that really stops this game from being like Game Jam capable is just the sheer amount of writing that there is. Like you would never be able to write that much in 2 days.
Right. No, I mean that it like literally feels like a Game Jam game. Just the kind of concept you'd come up with at a Game Jam.
Yeah, and that's why I just mean like if you were coming up with a concept for a game jam, you would probably say, that sounds great, but we can't write a whole like that much into it.
Right. That would be most of the workload.
Yeah. But yeah, I think otherwise I do agree. I feel like it has like a scrappy feel to it. And I think for me, that's a little bit enhanced by the fact that I knew that the fucking narrator was a guy from an indie podcast.
Yeah.
That's the kind of person you reach out to when you're making a scrappy project.
Given that your first couple of run-throughs all ended in with eldritch monsters appearing, did you find the game to be like really tense, and like to kind of like remain that way the whole time? Because like for me, like and I'm wondering how much is influenced by my first playthrough where I was like the negotiator, and got her to trust me. But like every time I'd go in, I'd be like, okay, like I really have to think about like what choice I make here, like because I don't want to fuck up like what I'm trying to do, and like I think the music also adds to that, right? Because it's trying to kind of create like a unease, kind of atmosphere. So like I know it always worked. Like I always did feel like kind of like, how is she gonna fucking react if I do this? Better think it through. So I thought it was impressive that it stayed that way for me the whole playthrough.
Yeah, I think it was definitely more tense on those early runs, mostly because I didn't know that at the end of the run you were guaranteed to like get the vessel, quote unquote, and bring it back. So I was trying to do things that felt like they were going to I'm describing this in a way that makes it seem like it's bad. This is like, if you were a game designer, this is the reaction you would want people to have. I was trying to do things that would end catastrophically, like in such a way that because that's how the first one ended, right? Like I was like, I died and then like a horrible thing happened, and then the world shattered and created like a conglomeration of like many bodies fused into one. Right. And the world couldn't take it, and that's when I got taken to the Long Quiet, I believe is what it's called. And I was like, so when I got to the next one and it was like Blade Monster, I was like, okay, how do I end this in such a way that the world is forced to take the Blade Monster? And so that's a lot of the decisions I were making was just like, how far can I get it along before like I flip a switch and try and like destroy it? And then when I got to the damsel and was just like, let's just leave, and they left, and then she gets taken anyway, I was like, oh, I probably could have just been doing whatever. And so the tension got cut after that. But I do agree with you, and maybe it was a little bit of me in my head, but like I was definitely tense in my first several playthroughs trying to like find the right moments to make moves, which I think is a cool way to sort of experience the game.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fascinating, like how your first experience colored your perception, and like how mine did too. Because like for me, like I kind of thought it was going to be like fucking, what's that stupid movie? 500 Days of Summer or 50 First Dates.
Those are both movies.
50 First Dates is the one I mean.
Okay.
Where I was like, I'm going to go down there, she's going to be hostile, and I'm going to have to win her over every time. Like, I thought that was going to be, like, the challenge of it, was, like, getting her to get, like, taking the, like, the violent, like, impulse at the beginning and, like, making her trust you was going to be, like, kind of the gameplay loop. So I think that's funny. How, yeah, your first experience, like, affects your expectations like that.
Yeah. Also, I just love Slay the Princess starring Adam Sandler.
Yeah. And whoever that, Drew Barrymore.
It was
maybe?
Drew Barrymore, yeah.
Yeah.
Or was that Spanglish?
I'd watch that.
I don't remember. Christ. Yeah, no, it was great. I do want to talk about, unless you had something you wanted to build off of there. I do want to talk about sort of the overarching narrative a little bit.
Sure.
Because it is, it really it really tied the room together like that rug, for me in a way that I was surprised by, as I described earlier. And I just kind of want to give it its flowers. The main plot here, the easy part is that you are essentially in a time loop. It's like a constructed reality that is just a path and a house, a cabin with a basement. You inhabit the body of a bird monster, and go into the cabin with the objective of killing the princess, and then depending on what happens at the end, it resets and you go again. And it was created by a mostly unexplained. I got to ask it because I did the ending twice. I got to ask it 10 questions, and I never really got like a direct answer as to like what the narrator actually is, but presumably a dead god. The echo of a dead god is how it is described. In order to condition you to kill the princess, who is another god that he believes embodies like change. And his idea is that if you kill her, it will end death as a concept. So that is his goal. And that is cool as a setup. Objectively, that's cool and rad.
Right.
It's a little simple and a little bit like, let's make the time loop thing just sort of work and not worry too much about it. And that's fine for the kind of game that it is. But I love at the end of the game, the objective that you sort of do over the course of it is that each of the endings that you get is a vessel. It is whatever version of that princess. The physical form of her is taken to the long quiet, and you give them to the other god, who slowly forms a new body with the vessels. And there's this moment at the end where one, it is revealed that you are also a god, and that you were constructed by the narrator, and that you in fact just are the long quiet, which is the place that you've been going to this whole time. And that's great. First of all, any game where part of the twist is that your character is also a place is going to get high marks in my book. But you confront the other god and you can just like ignore everything that he says and just say at the end, like, I'm not going to kill you. We're going to go become gods. Become as gods.
Become as gods.
But you can also go through and ask all of these questions about like, what is the nature of your reality and like, what are your plans to do? And the writing is so good that this actually hit me as being like a very heartfelt like thing. And it's great. And I'm so glad I went back to do the ending again, because I also just immediately chose, let us become gods. I mean, I asked her questions first, but then we became gods. And that ending is good. I like that ending. But there's, if you say that you're going to kill her and then have the conversation with her about everything that happens, the hero voice will come back and say that he can get you to her heart, which takes you back to the cabin. And then you have a conversation with the princess in the basement. And you get to once again choose whether or not you take the knife, which is this like big impetus of player agency. It's like taking the knife indicates aggression, not taking it indicates like a more peaceful approach. And that's how you've learned it throughout the game. So if you don't take the knife, you then have this conversation with the princess that is more human. She's no longer talking about like the grand cosmos and shit. And it's more about sort of like the experiences that you have had over the course of the last, I'm going on forever. I'm done soon, I promise. And what I really love about this is that in this game, the player is, it's an interesting perspective, because when you start the game, you don't know your identity within the game. and the narrator addresses you directly. And so it feels like it is supposed to be like in the Stanley Parable, the narrator talks to you. I mean, at the beginning of the Stanley Parable, it talks to Stanley, but the line blurs. And over time, you realize, oh, I'm not me, but also I am not the hero, who is a voice that exists just preloaded in. The body that you walk around in isn't really you either, but so you as the player have like all of these different things that you can associate with, and when it all kind of melds together, it feels like the conversation you have with the princess is literally just about the last 4 hours of your life that you spent playing this game. Like it's not the line is so blurred that your perspective is really more into it than it would be either in a third person game or a like first person game where you are playing as you. And I don't know, it just really hit me. And that last ending, especially with the game starting out as being like, this is a love story. It felt like a love story in a way that I was surprised by, and had actual like moving dialogue and thoughtful interpretations. And I really liked it, and I'm glad that I started over to do it. So that was it.
I did not go back for that other ending, but so yeah, I don't have quite as much of the context. But yeah, I think that's part of like what makes an interesting like antagonist, right? Is like the humanization. And yeah, like I don't know. I think like with the it's interesting that like your player character looks like the god that like the narrator is, like he created you in his image or whatever. Which is interesting to harken back to like pre-existing religious knowledge. And I think like because how I was thinking of it kind of before you brought up that like one of the endings lets you inhabit the princess, like, which is, I think strengthens this like association. It's just like she almost feels like she's like on equal footing to you, like almost as if she could be being played by another real person, right? You know, like the dynamic between you and her is actually like really interesting the more you learn about it. So yeah, there is something there that does really like, I think, emotionally engage you. Like you do really feel like you develop like a relationship to her that's like feels a little bit more real than your relationship to most video game characters.
You can even ask her about that when you like inhabit her. You like one of the first questions that you can ask is like, do you not have a guy? Like, where's your guy who hangs out in your head and tells you what to do?
Who's your guy?
Who's your guy? Which actually is another great note, because yeah, it is this game. I think the success of this game being like a purely narrative thing, like all of the mechanical choices that you make are in the service of creating more narrative, is that it so successfully strikes a balance between its more like heartfelt human elements, which I think is sort of what the grand finale of the game is about, but is sprinkled in and needs to exist in order to create that connection for the player. The horror elements of this game, which I think just feels like is the pedigree of this writer. Like the people who wrote this, I feel like are horror fans and wanted to incorporate a decent amount of that in this, because there are some really great concepts in here, as well as some like classic concepts like ghosts and zombies and shit. But then on the other hand, this game's also really funny sometimes. Like the writing is also clever and dryly humorous in a way that had me actually laughing at several points. So it really runs the gamut emotionally, and at no point did it ever feel like out of place. Which I was just absolutely shocked by. Like, maybe this is kind of an example of guy who grew up playing video games still surprised that video games can have good writing. Because like just the vast history of nobody ever hiring a writer to play a video game or to they could play video games if they wanted to. Hiring a writer to be on the team is coloring my influence here. But to me, it feels very well written in that way.
Mm-hmm. For sure. On a slightly related note, I looked up some reviews for this before doing the episode. Like, multiple of them started with, like, Slay the Princess is a psychological horror game. And I was like, whoa. Well, I feel like it definitely falls under the umbrella of horror.
Uh-huh.
Like, I never... Like, it definitely has horror writing in it and concepts and stuff. Like, but I never, like, personally thought of it as a horror game. So I thought it was, like, really weird to see multiple sources say that, just come out with that as the first thing they say.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, because it does sort of bend genre a bit. Like, I think saying that something is a horror game in 2020, well, it's 2023, but 2024 is just like kind of sensationalism to some extent. Like, there are games that are horror games. If I'm playing Resident Evil, it's a horror game, but horror can be included, and to some extent needs to be included in, like, conflict driven narrative. Like, you have, there has to be real stakes at times. This game incorporates elements of horror that are outside of the ordinary everyday by making eldritch monstrosities, which is like the beginning of this game for me. But it does so many other things that it feels like kind of dumbing it down to just call it a horror game. So I agree, it's weird. Also, the game starts with a screen that says it's a horror game. Like, their disclaimer. I just completely
blocked that one out, I guess.
Yeah, it's like, this is a horror game, and go to this page if you want specific like triggers and shit, like content warning stuff. And I was like, oh, okay. And I originally thought that's a great idea, because my biggest problem with giving content warnings is that you do kind of spoil things. So I like the idea of just putting a website, like a link that you can go to. Couldn't do it in a movie or whatever. So, like, I understand that. Because the concept is great. Make sure people aren't just traumatized for no reason.
You could do it in a movie if you just, like, put a big QR code on the screen. Scan this for list of triggers. Yeah, everyone pulls out their phone.
Yeah, don't turn off your phone until after that screen, and you check to make sure that you're okay. I think people just assume that you'll do your own research at this point. But I was like, that's great. But then as I played the game, I was like, I kind of wish you didn't tell me it was a horror game. Because, one, I don't fully agree, but two, I mean, obviously there are horror elements, but two, like, it would have been very startling if I didn't know.
Yeah, when the blade monster rips out of her flesh, it was pretty scary.
Yeah. I do want to, like, sit somebody down who's never heard of or played the game and just, like, skip ahead to the beginning and be like, okay, just, like, follow the instructions. Because, like, you don't need a tutorial for this game. You just choose options and just see how they go about it. Because me knowing it's a horror game influenced my decisions, of course. Do we have pristine thoughts?
My pristine thoughts. This game was kind of surprising and also not surprising to me at the same time. As you said early in the episode, like, I feel like I am just in the target demographic for this game and did know that it looked like something I would like immediately upon seeing it. But yeah, I think it was interesting in a different way than I maybe imagined. So yeah, I think the writing is really great. I think the just like the simple kind of narrative concept that they hang the game on, I think really makes it work as a find the endings game. Like, we've talked about this on the past, like on Who's Lila, I think specifically. Like, I'm not a huge fan of collect the endings games because I think they're really cool in the beginning when you're discovering stuff, but then you hit a point where you're just trying stuff, like repeating a bunch of content just to try something different, and sometimes that doesn't work out the way you want it to. So they can kind of burn out pretty quick for me. But I think this game really works because of that structure. Like in like knowing that you only need to like collect a certain amount to reach an ending. Like it gives you a goal. Like I think it really helps a lot. And yeah, like the art style is great. Like I think it's impressive how every time you go to the cabin, it's like changes. The princess looks different every time on like the second act and stuff, or the second day. So yeah, a lot of like these little variations that like keep things interesting. Yeah, and it's like the relationship. I think the princess is very well realized. You build like a pretty organic feeling relationship with her. So yeah, I think this game is really successful and interesting on pretty much everything it's attempting, and like I ended up liking it more than I expected to, especially after like when I first started playing. Like I was like because like I'm not a huge fan of collect the endings games. I was like it was fighting a little bit of an uphill battle at first, but then pretty quickly sucked me in. So quite enjoyed my time with it.
Yeah, I had a weirdly similar experience. I was definitely intrigued by this game. I found it organically, at least in my mind. Nothing is organic. Everything is staged. We're all brains and bats. It's this year. And so obviously, like algorithmically, it was put in front of me for one reason or another. But when I found it, I sent it over. Like we have a chat that we will, send games to and be like, hey, should we do this for the podcast or whatever? And yeah, we both agreed like pretty early on, like this seemed like a cool thing that we should look into. But when we started this game, I was just like so not in the fucking mood. Which I think is a testament to the strength of the game, because it pulled me in so quickly after starting it. But like I also had that moment where I was like, I'm a little trepidatious and I feel like this is going to be boring for a while until it like amps up. But no, it just sort of ramps up immediately. And at least like for me, like the first few ones that I did were so like viscerally weird that it was like immediately in my wheelhouse without like any like need to stop or think about it. So yeah, I was really impressed by especially the writing. I really love the art style. I think it's such a good choice to go with, especially given like the insane variation. And it gets lent it a little bit of additional credence by the fact that it's like a constructed world, right? Like, so it has this sketchy sort of like coming up with it on the fly look to it. And all of that really pulled me into this like tonally, where I was pretty receptive to everything that it was putting down. And I do think, yeah, I said at the beginning, and yeah, we're definitely within that demographic of people who are going to be into this. But I do think that even if you aren't in that demographic, like, I think that is a strong enough argument to give it a try, because it is so well realized in the things that it does that it will pull you in. Is this like my favorite game? No. I think that there are limitations, yes, because it is a collect the endings game. Yes, because it has visual novel elements. It's like, it just isn't like the thing that gets my neurons firing most of the time. But it is such a great example of a thing that I'm normally so middling on that I find the game to be fantastic. Like, it's like a really great example of the things that games in this genre or of this style are capable of doing. Not to mention, yeah, having very effective emotional moments, both in terms of like the examination of humanity versus just eldritch horror that shocks you and takes you by surprise. So yeah, I really enjoyed this. I had a good time with it. And you should too. Thank you for listening to No Clip this week.
What's happening next time?
Next time, we're going to be talking about all the games that we talked about already. We're doing reruns. We've syndicated the show.
Yeah, we're doing a clip show.
Doing a clip show. Next time, we're doing the No Clip Award.
Clip show.
Yes, clip. No, we are doing the No Clip Awards. So we'll have all of your favorite returning categories, such as least likely to be compared to Dark Souls and smashiest balls, as well as many brand new categories, specifically tailored to the crop of games that we covered this year. So I hope you'll join us for that. Genuinely. I think that like the last No Clip Awards is like the best episode we've ever done. I think it's extremely funny. But I am biased because I'm on it. But until that time, you can get a hold of us. All of our contact information is on our website at noclippodcast.com or on splattershot.pro, where you can find links to our email address, our Twitter account, our Discord server, where you can post suggestions of games to play. I know we had already planned on doing this game, but it was also suggested on our Discord. So, you know that the people in there have a good head on their shoulders when it comes to cool games. And you can listen to all of our old episodes, including ones that we did on, guess what? Who's Lila? Fatum Bachelor and Midnight Manor. And other games that are narrative based as well, we categorize under the adventure game heading on YouTube. So you can check out a playlist that's got like fucking 100 more. Perfect Tides, another game that has really good writing and is sad sometimes.
Punch that subscribe button, leaving it as a bloody pulp with broken ribs on the ground.
Nobody's ringing any bells in this game.
But you could have a long humanizing conversation with the princess in the comment section.
Yes. Explode into blades and subscribe. Become a conglomerate of many forms in the comment section.
Yeah. Become a god and ring that bell.
Yep. That's the only way that you can do it.
Become the god of ringing that bell.
Become the saint of bell ringing. Hash slinging. Okay. Are you ready, kids?
Aye, Captain.
I heard you.
Oh.
Oh, 1, 2, 3,
4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
That's really good. That's very funny in a way I like a lot.